Of all the great dramas written into Earth's history, few are as captivating as the rise and fall of the dinosaurs. These magnificent reptiles were not just animals, they were the architects of ecosystems, shaping landscapes and dictating the survival of nearly every creature that lived beside them. For more than 160 million years, they ruled unchallenged. From lumbering giants that shook the ground with every step, to small fleet-footed hunters darting through underbrush, to armored tanks and crested marvels that seemed designed more by imagination than by nature, dinosaurs were endlessly adaptable, endlessly inventive, and throughout their reign, it must have seemed, at least to them, that the Earth would always be theirs. Their world stretched across every continent, from the lush fern-filled forests of the north to the dry deserts of the south, and in each of those places, they reigned supreme. But fate has never promised permanence, not even to those who appear invincible. One ordinary day in the late Cretaceous, the sky darkened in fire. A rock from the heavens, 6 miles wide, came screaming into the shallow seas near what we now call the peninsula. The force of its arrival was beyond comprehension. Shockwaves raced across continents, tsunamis swallowed coasts, and an inferno swept through forests as debris rained down from the skies. Within mere hours, ecosystems that had taken millions of years to balance were obliterated. Creatures that had thrived for ages, dinosaurs, flying reptiles, giant marine reptiles, and countless others were suddenly erased from the story of life. To imagine this moment is to picture chaos at an unimaginable scale, where entire landscapes burned, skies turned black, and the Earth itself seemed to stagger beneath the weight of disaster. This was the KPG extinction, one of the most violent turning points the Earth has ever endured. It did not simply end an age, it shattered a world. The dominion of the dinosaurs collapsed in a geological heartbeat, and in their absence, silence spread across the globe. Yet extinction, as cruel as it is, always clears the way for transformation. What emerged in the wake of this catastrophe was not emptiness but a new beginning, a planet in recovery. Imagine a world where the forests are ash-choked, where the once familiar giants are gone, where the air is thick with uncertainty. Into this emptiness, survivors crept out: small mammals, stubborn reptiles, hardy birds, and resilient plants. These were not the rulers of old, but the pioneers of what was to come. From their persistence would arise strange experiments in evolution, lineages unlike anything that had existed before. This was a time when Earth was fragile, unstable, and yet brimming with hidden potential. The dinosaurs' disappearance did not end life's story, it merely turned the page. In their absence, a strange new chapter began, one that would reshape the very destiny of the planet. A chapter filled with bizarre creatures, shifting landscapes, and unexpected rulers. This was the Dani in the first age of the Paleocene. It was the Earth after the dinosaurs, a world still reeling from devastation, but already preparing for its next act. The world plunged into darkness. So, what was it like in those first terrible years after the asteroid struck? To put it simply, it was still Earth, but an Earth unrecognizable, stripped of its giants, plunged into chaos, and scarred by fire. The impact itself had unleashed devastation, but what followed was just as lethal. The skies filled with soot and debris, blocking out the sun. For months, possibly years, sunlight was reduced to a dim twilight. Without light, photosynthesis all but ceased. Forests collapsed, grasslands withered, and ecosystems that had once been so carefully balanced were thrown into ruin. With the forests gone, much of the planet looked barren, desolate, almost like a global wasteland. In this light-starved world, plants that depended on sunlight stood no chance. What thrived instead was something much stranger. Fungi, mushrooms, molds, and fungal mats spread across the planet, feasting on the decaying remains of the dead world. The so-called fungal takeover turned the Earth into something that looked less like a lush green paradise and more like a damp, rotting planet. A planet where decay itself ruled the landscape. Animals that had relied on fruit, seeds, or leafy plants found themselves starving. Large herbivores had already been wiped away by the impact, and now smaller creatures that clung to survival were forced to adapt. Scavenging became the only option. Mammals, birds, and reptiles that could feed on seeds or carrion had the advantage. Insects, tube beetles, ants, and scavenger flies exploded in numbers, cleaning up the remains of an age gone by. For a long stretch of time, life lived on the edge. Many species perished not from the impact itself, but from the long famine that followed. The dinosaurs were gone, but their absence was not immediately filled. The Earth was quiet in a way it hadn't been for millions of years. A strange, eerie stillness settled over the planet, yet even in this darkness, life found a way forward. Part 2. The return of the green. Slowly, after years of dim skies and fungal carpets, the planet began to heal. The atmosphere cleared, sunlight returned, and with it came the first wave of regrowth. Ferns were among the first plants to reclaim the land. Hardy and fast-growing, they carpeted landscapes that had been reduced to ash and rubble. It was an almost alien sight, forests of ferns dominating vast stretches of land. In time, palms and flowering plants began to push back as well. Slowly, what had been a dead planet was clothed once more in green. This regrowth was patchy at first, but soon ecosystems began to rebuild themselves. In these early Paleocene forests, the world looked familiar and yet strange. Dense, humid jungles filled with low, shrubby plants rather than towering giants. It was as though the earth itself was learning to breathe again, step by step, root by root. Reptiles. Survivors of the old world, the dinosaurs had perished, but not all reptiles were lost. Crocodilians, those ancient survivors that had already outlived multiple mass extinctions, found themselves thriving. They had endured the darkness by being generalists, eating almost anything they could find, and living in aquatic refuges less affected by climate swings. With competitors gone, they spread widely. Some species grew to terrifying sizes again, patrolling rivers and lakes as apex predators. Snakes, too, began their quiet rise. With mammals and birds still relatively small, snakes could exploit new niches, preying on rodents, early primates, and even other reptiles. Some grew larger than ever before, setting the stage for monstrous serpents in later epochs. Turtles, with their armored shells and ability to endure harsh conditions, thrived as well. They became a familiar presence in lakes, rivers, and coastlines, continuing largely unchanged as the world transformed around them. Lizards of all shapes and sizes likewise found opportunities, filling in the many ecological holes left behind by vanished lineages. Mammals step into the light for over 100 million years. Mammals had been living in the shadows of dinosaurs, mostly small, nocturnal, and inconspicuous. But with the dinosaurs gone, the shadows lifted. At first, mammals remained tiny, little more than shrew-like insect eaters. But almost immediately, they began to diversify. Rodents appeared, nibbling seeds and nuts in the fern-filled forests. Primates, our own distant ancestors, took to the trees, developing grasping hands and sharp vision. Hoofed mammals, the ancestors of today's deer, horses, and cows, began their story as small, dog-sized plant eaters. Even early carnivorous mammals appeared, prowling the undergrowth in search of prey. One of the most fascinating groups were the Mesenikian, strange, wolf-like hunters with hoofed feet. Though they looked like predators, they were distantly related to herbivores and would later give rise to whales. These early experiments in mammalian design show how rapidly evolution took advantage of the empty world left behind. Birds, insects, and the buzz of new life. Though non-avian dinosaurs were gone, the closest relatives, birds, had survived. These weren't the towering terror birds of later epochs, but smaller, more primitive forms. Some resembled ducks and chickens, others were like pigeons or shorebirds in the forests. They took on roles once filled by pterosaurs and smaller dinosaurs. They spread quickly, adapting to seeds, insects, and fruits as they became available. Insects were equally critical. Beetles, ants, termites, and pollinators all rebounded swiftly, playing their crucial roles in decomposing plant matter and helping forests recover. Their populations supported both birds and mammals, forming an essential link in the new food chains. The buzzing of insects and the songs of early birds were the soundtrack of the Danian Age. It was a quieter earth, but one beginning to fill with the hum of new life. Oceans of change on land, mammals and reptiles were beginning their ascents, but in the oceans, another transformation was underway. The great marine reptiles, mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, and ichthyosaurs, had all perished in the extinction. Ammonites, once among the most common ocean animals, vanished completely. The seas were emptier than they had been for tens of millions of years. Into that emptiness stepped survivors: sharks, rays, and bony fish. Sharks in particular rebounded, filling the role of top predators in the seas. Some grew enormous, reclaiming the dominance they once had in earlier ages. Early whales were still tens of millions of years away, but already, mammals were beginning tentative experiments along coastlines. Coral reefs, damaged by the extinction, began to recover. Slowly, the oceans returned to life. Though missing their great reptiles, they were becoming the seas we would recognize today, dominated by fish, sharks, and the ancestors of modern marine mammals. And so, alongside the creatures of land, the oceans too were reinventing themselves, carrying forward only the lineages that had been resilient enough to endure catastrophe.